The scream trapped in my throat tasted like copper. 3 days ago, surgeons carved a kidney out of my body to save my father's life. Tonight, I woke up in a pool of cold sweat, reaching for the only thing that made the agony bearable. The bottle of opioids was gone. My wheelchair was missing. The apartment was silent as a tomb. I dragged my bleeding stitches across the hardwood floor, inch by inch, until my trembling fingers found my phone. There was an Instagram notification from my sister, Serafina. Touchdown Aspen. Daddy's recovery trip. #miracle. They didn't just leave me to die alone in my penthouse while they flew private on my dime. Serafina stole my painkillers for a recreational high. I didn't call 911. I didn't call them. I pulled up the Family Trust banking app and through the blinding pain I finally smiled. If you have ever set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm, tell me in the comments, what was the moment you finally handed them the ash? I dragged myself onto the couch, every inch of movement sending a fresh spike of fire through my side. I didn't waste energy sobbing. Tears are for people who still have hope that their family might love them. I had something better. I had the password. My name is Daisy. I am 32 years old and my father, Robert, thinks I am nothing more than a boring, obedient risk assessor. That is why, just before they wheeled him into the operating room to receive my kidney, he signed the papers making me the interim trustee of the family estate. He needed someone he considered safe to manage the books while he was under anesthesia. He thought he was handing the keys to a doormat. He forgot that doormats are the first things you step on to get inside the house. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness of my living room, the only light in a world that felt very cold. I logged into the trust portal. The balance stared back at me, a number with enough zeros to fix everything or destroy it. The first notification popped up like a greeting card from hell. Pending transaction. The Aspen Club. $25,000. Caviar service and vintage champagne. They were drinking $1,000 bottles of wine to celebrate a successful surgery while I lay here bleeding without so much as an aspirin. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wring my hands or wonder if I was being too harsh. I clicked the transaction. I selected the option for unauthorized fraud. I hit confirm. The bank's algorithm would do the rest, instantly freezing the card for suspicious activity. Next, the flights. I pulled up the itinerary. First-class return tickets for 3. Non-refundable unless cancelled by the account holder. I hovered the cursor over the cancel booking button. My hand didn't shake. I clicked. The confirmation email arrived 3 seconds later. They were now stranded in a ski resort town during peak season with no way home and no credit cards. But I wasn't done. I needed cash and I needed it now. I navigated to the digital asset manager. There was Serafina's pride and joy. A brand new custom-ordered Range Rover, currently parked in the private hangar's long-term lot. The digital title was in the trust's name, which meant it was in my name. I opened the wholesaler app on my phone. I inputted the VIN. I selected immediate distress sale. The offer came back 40% under market value. It was a terrible deal financially, but it was a perfect deal emotionally. I accepted. The funds hit the main account instantly. I used that money to book a 24-hour concierge medical team. I wasn't going to die here. I paid for the rush service. A nurse would be at my door in 20 minutes. I leaned back against the cushions, breathing through the pain. My phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a security alert from the bank. Transaction declined, the Aspen Club. Then another. Transaction declined, Hertz Rental. Then a third. It was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. In a restaurant 2,000 miles away, the music had just stopped. The waiter was standing over my father, holding a black card that was now just a piece of useless plastic. I closed my eyes and waited for the nurse. The war had begun. 12 hours later, the silence broke. There was no polite knock, no buzzing of the intercom. There was just the violent, splintering crash of my front door being kicked in. I was sitting in my wheelchair by the foyer, the Ford drip clicking rhythmically beside me. The private nurse I'd hired, a woman named Brenda who looked like she could bench press a truck, stepped in front of me. "Stay back," she barked. But the intruders weren't burglars. They were family. Robert marched in first. He looked disheveled, his expensive ski jacket stained with travel grime, his face flushed with a terrifying mix of exhaustion and steroid-fueled rage. Serafina followed, shivering in a thin cashmere sweater, her eyes wild and dark. They had found a way back, probably maxed out an emergency card or bartered their watches, and they hadn't come to apologize. They had come to collect. "You ungrateful little bitch," Serafina hissed, stepping around my father. "Do you have any idea what you did? We were stranded in a blizzard." I didn't flinch. I held up the manila folder resting on my lap. "I'm revoking the trust," I said, my voice rasping but steady. "I'm liquidating the accounts. You're cut off, all of you. Get out of my house." Robert didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just laughed. It was a cold, wet sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. He stepped closer, looking down at me in my wheelchair like I was a broken appliance he was about to throw away. "You think you're in charge, Daisy?" he asked softly. "You think because you held the pen for 5 minutes you own the ink?" He stepped aside and motioned to the open doorway. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into my foyer, their hands resting on their belts. The room seemed to shrink. "Officers, Robert said, his voice instantly shifting into the trembling, heartbroken tone of a victim. That's her. That's my daughter. She waited until I was under anesthesia for life-saving surgery to hack my accounts. He's stealing my identity. She's mentally unstable due to the medication. That is a lie, I said, trying to stand, but the pain slammed me back down. I am the trustee. I have the papers. Serafina lunged forward, holding up a phone with a digital affidavit. She threatened to kill us if we didn't give her the money. We went to Aspen to hide from her. She's an addict, look at her. The officers looked at me, pale, sweating, hooked up to and for, surrounded by pill bottles. They didn't see a victim. They saw a junkie who had robbed her elderly father. Ma'am, stand up, the taller officer commanded. I can't, I gritted out. I just had surgery. Stand up. They bypassed the civil dispute logic because Robert had dropped the nuclear bomb. Elder financial abuse. In this state, it was a felony that allowed for immediate arrest to protect the senior citizen. They unhooked my fore. They pulled my arms behind my back. The metal cuffs bit into my skin, sending white-hot lightning through my surgical wound. I gasped, tears finally leaking from my eyes, but I kept my gaze locked on Robert. He was watching me with a small, satisfied smirk. And in that moment the fog cleared. I remembered being 12 years old, sitting in the backseat of his car with a broken arm, sobbing while he finished a business call. He had told me then, "Don't be selfish, Daisy. Pain is mental. The world doesn't stop because you're hurting." I realized then that this wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was the design. I wasn't a daughter to him. I was livestock. I was bred to be harvested, trained to be silent, and conditioned to believe that my suffering was the price of his love. And now that he had taken the organ he needed, he was discarding the husk. "You have the wrong felon," I whispered as they dragged me out the door. Serafina waved from the doorway, holding the keys to my apartment that she'd swiped off the table. "Don't worry, sis," she called out. "We'll watch the place while you're gone." The door slammed shut. I was bleeding, cuffed, and alone in the back of a squad car, while the man living off my kidney settled into my home. The back of a police cruiser is designed to strip you of your humanity. It is hard plastic, cold metal, and the smell of stale fear. There are no door handles. There is no seatbelt for your comfort, only for your containment. Every time the car hit a pothole, the shockwave traveled up my spine and detonated in my left side. It felt like someone was ripping the stitches out with a rusty hook. I bit my lip until I tasted iron, but I didn't make a sound. I knew how to be quiet. I had been training for this moment my entire life. The pain wasn't new. It was a time machine. Suddenly, I wasn't 32 in handcuffs. I was 12 years old, sitting in the back seat of my father's Mercedes. My left arm was bent at an angle that made people look away, throbbing with a heat that made me nauseous. I had fallen off the swing set at school. The school nurse had called my father 3 times before he answered. When he finally picked me up, he didn't drive to the hospital. He drove to the community center. "Serafina has her solo in 20 minutes, he had said, checking his watch in the rearview mirror. "We can't miss it. It would crush her." "Dad, it hurts," I had whimpered, clutching my arm to my chest. He had turned around, his eyes cold and flat. "Don't be selfish, Daisy. Pain is mental. The world doesn't stop because you're hurting. Put on a jacket so no one sees it and sit quietly." So I did. I sat in the auditorium for 2 hours, sweating through my clothes, watching Serafina spin in a pink tutu while my radius bone ground against my ulna. I learned the lesson well. Serafina is the star. I am the audience. Her joy is essential. My pain is an inconvenience. The police car turned a sharp corner, slamming my shoulder against the door. I gasped, the memory dissolving into the current agony. They hadn't just neglected me. They had groomed me. I realized with a clarity that was colder than the handcuffs that my father had never looked at me and seen a child. He had seen an insurance policy. He had seen a spare tire. He had seen a warehouse of spare parts that he could harvest when the time was right. When the doctor told us 6 months ago that Robert needed a kidney, he didn't ask me. He didn't cry. He didn't even say please. He just looked at me across the sterile desk and said, "Well, you're the match." Obviously. It wasn't a request. It was a withdrawal from an account he had been paying into with roof and board for 3 decades. He thought he owned the asset. I looked at the back of the officer's head, separated from me by a wire cage. He thought he had arrested a criminal. He thought I was a greedy daughter trying to rob a sick old man. He didn't know that the man he was protecting had turned his own child into livestock. But Robert had made a miscalculation. He thought that teaching me to endure pain would make me compliant. He thought that forcing me to wait in the car with a broken arm would break my spirit. He was wrong. He didn't make me weak. He made me unbreakable. I could sit in this car bleeding and cuffed and I wouldn't break because I knew something he didn't. "You have the wrong felon," I whispered to the empty air. The officer glanced at me in the rearview mirror, eyes dismissive. He turned up the radio. He didn't know that I wasn't the one trapped in this car. The real trap had already been set and Robert was walking right into it. The interrogation room was a concrete box designed to make you feel small. It smelled of bleach and old coffee. I sat on the metal chair, my hands cuffed to the table, my breath coming in shallow gasps to avoid pulling at the stitches in my side. There was a paper cup of water in front of me. I didn't touch it. I wasn't going to give them my DNA, and I certainly wasn't going to accept hospitality from the people holding the keys to my cage. The door opened with a heavy clank. A detective walked in. He looked like he'd been awake for 30 hours. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot, and he carried a file folder like it was a weapon. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat down across from me and tossed a stack of photos onto the table. They were grainy traffic cam shots of Serafina's Range Rover being loaded onto a flatbed truck. Grand larceny, he said, his voice flat. Identity theft. Elder abuse. Your father is a beloved philanthropist in this city, Daisy. Do you know how it looks when his junkie daughter steals his car while he's recovering from surgery? I am not a junkie, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I am a kidney donor 1 week post-op. He ignored me and slid a pen across the table. This is the reality, he said. Your father is devastated. If you sign the papers restoring his access to the trust and return the money, he'll ask the DA for leniency. He wants you in rehab. Therapy. It was classic coercion. Isolate, accuse, then offer a lifeline that was really a noose. Signing meant confessing. The pain in my side flared, but it sharpened my thinking. This wasn't about justice. It was about stopping the wire transfers before they cleared. He was scared. You haven't run my background yet, have you? I asked. He scoffed. You're an unemployed daughter living off family money. No, I said calmly. I'm a certified forensic risk assessor. I investigate high net worth fraud. His expression shifted. I sold the car as interim trustee, I continued. It was a depreciating asset. Every dollar went into secured escrow. I have the paper trail. I leaned forward. You're interrogating the wrong person. This isn't a domestic theft. You're standing at the edge of a federal RICO case. I told him to call the FBI Financial Crimes Division. To tell them I had the black ledger for the Robert Hayes Foundation. For a moment he considered it. Then the door opened. Marcus Thorne, the family fixer, walked in, followed by my father Robert in a wheelchair playing the role of the broken man. Robert looked at me with practiced sorrow. Oh Daisy, he murmured. The meds are making you imagine things. When he leaned close his voice dropped. You mean the hard drive in the wall safe behind your painting? My blood froze. Serafina's at your apartment, he whispered. She destroyed everything. Microwave. Drill. Ash. He turned back to the detective. There is no ledger. My daughter is sick. If she signs the trust back I won't press charges. The detective's belief died. There's no evidence, he said. Book her, Robert added. I have a flight to Aspen. As the paperwork slid toward me I laughed, low and sharp. You destroyed the laptop? I asked. To ash, Robert whispered. Good, I said. Because the evidence isn't on the laptop. It's inside you. The room went silent. I told the detective the truth. A $50 million Ponzi scheme, medical charities, shell companies, an active DOJ investigation. I didn't give him my kidney to save him, I said evenly. I gave it to keep him alive long enough to stand trial. Dead men don't pay restitution. The door opened again. 4 FBI agents entered. Robert Hayes, the lead agent, said, You are under arrest. As they cuffed him his face collapsed in horror. I planted life inside you, I whispered. So it could grow into a prison sentence. Later, alone in my rec department, I flushed the painkillers. I didn't need numbness anymore. The scar on my side would remain. Good. It wasn't a wound. It was a receipt. Sometimes you keep your enemies alive, just long enough to watch them fall.